Morgan had delivered the baby, and the doctor found immediately, the doctor was confused because the doctor found that it was a dead child. It's a lifeless baby. Now, in time, the mother's condition was also very critical. So, the doctor was in a dilemma. I told last day the question may come that what was the dilemma all about the doctor was suffering from. The doctor was in a dilemma because the mother's condition was also critical and baby was lifeless. So, what he should do, whether he should try to make the baby revive, whether to make the resuscitate the baby, resuscitate means to revive the baby, or he should try to save the life of the mother. Now, instinctively he could not take this decision rationally. So, instinctively he had given the baby to the nurse who was there to help the doctor, and he immediately started the treatment of the mother, and he pushed an injection, and in due course of time the mother recovered, the mother came out of that critical condition. Now, the doctor could give his attention towards the baby. Immediately when the doctor saw that the mother's condition improved, the mother had come out from that critical stage, he asked the nurse where the baby was, and the nurse told that he had kept it under the bed because it was a lifeless baby. The doctor knelt down, and he had just taken the baby out of that bed, and the doctor saw that it was a soft, no doubt the baby was born just 15 minutes back. So, it was soft as tallow. What was there? The hard fat of animals, the hard fat of animals melted and just having just light yellowish color. So, the baby's color was something like this. It was a perfect, it was a boy, and physically it was a perfect baby. There was no discrepancy in its physical formation, but the thing is that the baby was lifeless. Really, the doctor was very much panicked that what he should answer to the family members, where to whom he had promised and everything would be okay. Unfortunately, actually he had promised that everything would be okay. Afterwards, what happened? Let us start from page number 68. Still kneeling, Andrew stared at the child with a haggard frown. Now, Andrew was still kneeling. He was sitting on his knees, and he was looking. Stared means looking fixedly towards the baby with a haggard frown. Haggard means pale, and frown means corrugated eyebrow. Frown means when a person is thinking heavily, his eyebrows got corrugated. This is a frown. So, he was looking at the baby with that the haggard frown. The whiteness meant only one thing: asphyxia pallida, and his mind, unnaturally tense, raced back to a case he once had seen in the Samaritan, to the treatment that had been used. Now, the doctor realized that this might be the case of asphyxia pallida. What is asphyxia pallida? Let us come to the word note at the bottom of that page. That asphyxia pallida, it means suffocation or unconscious condition caused by lack of oxygen and excess of carbon dioxide in blood. Actually, the baby was suffering from asphyxia pallida. Question may come that what was the problem with the baby? The baby was suffering from asphyxia pallida. And what is it? Now, this is the suffocation or unconscious condition caused by lack of oxygen and excess of carbon dioxide in the blood, accompanied by the paleness of skin, weak pulse, and loss of reflexes. All the baby had all the symptoms, and the doctor realized that this might be the case of asphyxia pallida, and really he immediately remembered that he had such a case when he had seen in the Samaritan, and to the treatment and what treatment it has been used. He knew, as if he knew the treatment, what was the treatment of such case. Instantly he was on his feet. So, as he was kneeling down, he just stood up, because as if he had realized that this is the case of asphyxia pallida, and as if he knew what is the treatment of it. Get me hot water and cold water, he threw out to the nurse, and basins too. Quick, quick. Immediately he ordered the nurse to bring hot water and cold water, and basins too. Here basins means to tumblers, to bring hot waters and cold water. He immediately had given the order to the nurse. But doctor, she faltered, her eyes on the pallid body of the child. Now the nurse was very much stupefied. The nurse was very much confused, because the nurse could not understand what the doctor wanted to do, because it was a dead child. So how the doctor would be able to make the baby alive? And why the doctor was asking this hot water and cold water? The nurse was really folded. He could not understand what the doctor wanted to mean. So he just told, doctor, she faltered, her eyes on the pallid body of the child. Here pallid means lifeless, you know, and the nurse was looking at the child. Quick, he shouted. The doctor shouted his order again. Snatching a blanket, he laid the child upon it and began the special method of respiration. Now the doctor had started to give artificial respiration to the baby. He had started that method of respiration, and he had wrapped the child into a blanket. The basins arrived, the ewer, the big iron kettle. Immediately to basins means, as I told you, tramlers. Ewer means a jug, and to iron kettle. Iron kettle, it contains hot water. These all came. Frantically, he splashed cold water into one basin, into the other. He mixed water as hot as his hand could bear. And in one basin, he just poured cold water, in other basin, in other tumbler, as I told that he had mixed hot water and cold water and make it lukewarm, because if it is hot water, then his hand could not bear it. So he make it a lukewarm water by mixing hot and cold, and in another tumbler it is totally cold water. Now then, like a crazy juggler, I feel you have all have seen juggling. Juggling means, you know, a juggler, a person who takes 4, 5, 6 balls in 2 of his hands and just keep them, start to throw them, keeping the balancing of all these, keeping the balance of all these balls. So this is juggling. So like a crazy juggler, like a mad juggler, he hurried the child between the two, now plunging it into the icy, now into the streaming bath. So like a juggler, he was dipping the child once in a icy cold water and immediately after to the hot water. Like a juggler, he was doing this, and this is the treatment the doctor knew. So like a crazy juggler, the doctor was dipping the child once in a hot water and immediately after into cold water. He was doing this. 15 minutes passed, and as he was doing this process, 15 minutes went by. Sweat was now running into Andrew's eyes, blinding him. Though it was early morning, the temperature remains low this time, but the effort the doctor was giving that make him to sweat, and the sweat, perspiration was coming. Actually, here that sweat was running into Andrew's eyes. Perspiration was coming from its head, and the perspiration, the sweat was coming into his eyes and makes him blind. He couldn't see because of that sweat. So that is the, though the temperature was minimum that time, it's early morning, but he was sweating because of that effort and excitement, and how worried he was. Because of this, he was sweating, and sweat or perspiration was getting into his eyes from his head, and made him blind. He couldn't see properly because of that sweat that comes to his eyes. One of his sleeves hung down, dripping. Dripping means extremely wet. Actually, he had folded his sleeves. Now, one of his sleeves had unfolded, and it has actually become wet, extremely wet, as he was dipping the baby into hot water and cold water. So one of his sleeves of his shirt is extremely wet. His breath came pantingly. He was panting means gasping. He was breathing heavily. Not only because of effort, but also excitement. He was extremely excited when he was dipping the child into hot water and cold water. And that is the reason that his breath came pantingly. But no breath came from the lax body of the child. Lax means loose. The child's body remained loose. No breath came from that lax body. The doctor wanted the child to cry. The doctor wanted the child to breathe, but no breath came out from that lax body. But the doctor was breathing heavily. He was panting. He was gasping because of that effort, and not only for effort but because of that excitement that he was in that process. A desperate sense of defeat pressed on him, a raging hopelessness. Now, as the time is going on, a desperate sense of defeat pressed on him. Why? Because in that case of asphyxia pallida, if the baby, there is a chance of surviving the baby, it happens within 5 or 10 minutes. Because he had tried all his methods to revive the baby. He had given that artificial respiration. He was dipping the baby into hot water and cold water. He also had rubbed the baby with the wrap towel. He had given all these actually method to make the baby to get the breath, to get the baby starts its breathing. But still, these did not work. And that is the reason the doctor also realized that probably it is really a dead child. Probably the baby was suffering from asphyxia pallida, but still the baby may not come back into life. And that is the reason a desperate sense of defeat pressed on him. He became very much desperate, because as if the doctor realized that he was going to defeat in that race. A raging hopelessness, he was getting very much hopeless. He felt the midwife watching him in stark consternation, while there, pressed back against the wall where she had all the time remained, her hand pressed to her throat. He felt, he didn't see, but he felt the midwife actually watching him in stark consternation. Consternation means anxiety. He realized that the lady, the midwife, he was looking at him with stark means extreme consternation, with extreme anxiety. While there, pressed back against the wall where she had all the time remained, her hand pressed to her throat, uttering no sound, her eyes burning upon him, was the old lady. And the old lady, the mother of Susan Morgan, what she was doing? She was standing against the wall, and all the time she was uttering no sound. She was praying. Here, how her hand pressed to her throat, just like this. The old lady, the mother of Susan Morgan, she was just standing against the wall, just like this. The hand pressed to her throat, uttering no sound, her eyes burning upon him, and she was looking with all the excitement, with all the concentration towards the doctor. What the doctor was doing was the old woman. Old woman, she was nearly 70 years old. This is Susan Morgan's mother. He remembered her longing for a grandchild, as great as had been her daughter's longing for this child. Here, longing means desire. Now, whenever the doctor saw the old lady was standing in a posture just against the wall, the doctor remembered that how that old lady had a strong desire to have a grandchild. Why not? Because after the marriage of 20 years, almost 20 years, they got the opportunity to get a grandchild. So the doctor realized that how the lady was desperately wanting to have a grandchild. Not only that, the doctor was also actually remembered that the daughter's longing for his child, how the daughter means the mother, would-be mother, how she was very much desirous to have the child after almost 20 years of the marriage. All dashed away now, but all this desire, all this longing, all this expectation had been shattered, dashed away, had been shattered, futile, beyond remedy. Here, remedy means repair, means all these things has gone beyond repair. All these hopes, all this desire, all this longing, it could not be repaired. Everything has been shattered. Yes, it's true. The doctor realized that how the old lady had the desire to have the child, how the mother had the desire to have her child. The lady had a desire, the old lady had the desire to have grandchild. All had been shattered, all had been dashed away, all had become futile, without result, beyond remedy. That cannot be, this desire cannot be repaired. The floor was a dangled mess. Dangle means dirty and wet, dangled mess. Stumbling over a sopping towel, Andrew almost dropped the child, which was now wet and slippery in his hands like a strange white fish. Now the floor was a mess, dangled, dirty and wet, and when the doctor was moving, as if he was stumbled and about to fall down, he was stumbled in a sopping towel. A towel was there, sopping wet towel, and he was actually stumbled over this. And as the boy, it was in his hand, it was almost got slipped from his hand, because it became so slippery, because he had been dipping it into water. It became very slippery, and it has become just like a white strange fish in his hand. For mercy's sake, doctor, whimpered the midwife, it's stillborn. The midwife, the nurse who was there, the trained nurse, she was just now praying to the praying to the doctor, what you are doing, for mercy's sake. It's a stillborn. Stillborn means, dead from his birth. So the midwife was telling the doctor. The midwife couldn't understand. The midwife thought the doctor was getting crazy. And the midwife realized that, yes, what the doctor was doing, it's a dead child. So what the doctor was doing, wasting its time. The doctor is getting crazy. The doctor has become mad, because he was trying to revive the dead child. So the midwife told, for mercy's sake, doctor, whimpered. Here, whimpered means sobbing, cried. The midwife, it's stillborn. Andrew did not heed her. Andrew did not give attention to her prayer. Beaten, despairing, having labored in vain for half an hour, he still persisted in one last effort, rubbing the child with a rough towel. Now what Andrew was doing then? Beaten means almost he had been defeated. Despairing, he was getting despair. He was not ready to listen anything. Having labored in vain for half an hour. Having labored means he was giving all his effort, but in vain. Vain means resultless for half an hour. He still persisted in one last effort. Still he was giving his effort, and that might be the last effort. Now what he was doing now, rubbing the child with a rough towel, and he was rubbing the child with a rough towel, he was rubbing, cursing and releasing the little chest with both his hands. Cursing means here pressing and releasing the child, little child, with both his hands, trying to get breath into that limp body. Limp means here means here lifeless. He was trying to get breath into that lifeless body. He had taken the baby in his hands, and he was pressing his little chest and releasing it, pressing and releasing the little chest. He was trying his best so that the breath could come into that lifeless baby. What happened afterwards, we will see in our next class. So today, after this, it's time up. It's very interesting. Last part is also very interesting. So thank you very much for joining my class, and I will suggest that you must join the next class, so that you might know what would be the culmination of that story. So thank you very much for joining this class. Thank you. And another thing, that from next day your exam is starting, so best of luck.